Tonight, we're going to be continuing our discussion of step 3, and we have a guest presenter tonight. Dr. Michael Mcgee, an addiction psychiatrist up in Central California, is going to be sharing some of his insights into this process that happens with the 12 steps, especially with step 3. As you know, Michael will have about 20 minutes to go ahead and share. And then Mary and I will both serve as discussants tonight after Michael has finished. So after he's done, then we will open up the room for a 2-minute sharing and participation. You guys know by now how to raise your hands. Craig, if you're out there, would you help with timing tonight when we get to that part of the program tonight? I'd appreciate it. And so now let me turn this over to Michael. Michael, Happy New Year, and thank you for coming and joining us this evening.
Oh, thank you for having me. Happy New Year, and it's just great to be here. I'm just sharing my screen now, and I just want to, can everybody see this presentation?
Yes.
Okay, so you can see it? Okay. So great. Well, first of all, I want to say I'm going to be presenting on spiritual awakening, emotional sobriety, and taking the first step. And I'd like to consider myself actually a new member of the group. I've attended, and I just love this group, and I'm hoping that I can join you guys all as a member and continue this process on Thursday nights. After the last time I came, I reached out to Alan and suggested that I had maybe some thoughts that you guys might find of benefit. I want to start with some gratitudes in terms of just the gratitude that I have to Alan for allowing me to be with you all, and for him creating this group, and for who he is and the books he's written. His books have really influenced my thinking and my treatment and my own recovery and my own writing. So thank you, Alan. In terms of about me, I'm an addiction psychiatrist. I'm in recovery from trauma and neglect. I have my own wounds that I'm still, managing and healing from. And I'm an author. I've written 3 books so far. I have a 4th one that I'm working on now. 2 books are on recovery, and 1 is on emotional pain management and easing emotional suffering. My comments today are going to be based on a kind of therapy that I've developed and I provide in my practice called awakening therapy. And I have an article that I've written on awakening and recovery. It's a review article in Alcoholism Treatment Quarterly. And if anybody's interested in getting a copy of this to a reprint, I'd be happy to send you one. And that sort of really lays out in detail sort of the background for the comments I'm going to be making today about emotional sobriety in step 3. Let's see here, if I can advance this. So if you're interested in a comment in a reprint, you can reach me at mdm@wellmind.com. That's my contact information. So awakening therapy is based on the 3 A's of awakening, and I can't go into detail because of time today on these, but very briefly, they are attending to this present moment as a practice of inquiry, deep inquiry, appreciating, which arises from attending, both appreciating in terms of deep understanding, but also the meaning of appreciating in terms of experiencing a profound sort of reverence and sacredness of this moment. And then out of appreciative attending, the practice of appreciative attending, we are inspired out of the reverence that arises from that practice. We are inspired to act with love. And if you look at the literature on awakening, both traditional literature in all the different religious traditions, as well as clinical literature, you'll see that the different components of practice that we practice to cultivate awakening can all be distilled down into these 3 steps. And so for me, the practice of these 3 steps is to ask myself, almost in a mantra kind of way, over and over again, 1,000 times a day, what is this? And then affirming this is sacred. And then asking myself, what would love do? Which oftentimes is a really difficult question. It can sometimes take weeks, if not months sometimes, to figure out what the loving thing to do is in any particular situation. And I'm going to be tying this into Alan's comments about emotional sobriety in step 3. So I want to start first by saying that, that Bill Wilson who really gave birth to really the most effective treatment for addiction, that his creation of the 12 steps and of AA started with his own drug-induced awakening experience. He was in a hospital and he took a concoction of belladonna and prickly ash and henbane and went into a delirium, a drug-induced delirium. And in that delirium, he had the famous white light experience, which was a profound awakening experience. And I want to make that point because for all of us to some degree, I think that recovery starts with an awakening, like, oh my God, this isn't working for me. There's got to be a better way. And what happens is with recovery, as I understand it, is that our awakening experiences deepen over time, and they transition from states or experiences to traits, more continuous ways of being. We're all awakened to some degree. It's not an all or none thing. And most of us go through what's called a gradual awakening over time. And really the recovery is in some ways a practice of nurturing our awakening. I also want to make a point that the 12 steps really is a process that cultivates our awakening. And in many ways, the 3 A's of awakening can be translated in the 12 steps and vice versa. I'd like to share very briefly, I've had many awakening experiences. I'd like to share one with you that was really transformative for me. I mean, they've all had a huge impact on me, but one that was really very impactful just a few years ago was I was backpacking with a friend and I was meditating by a lake all day and reading Thomas Merton and writing in my journal. And this just came over me in that stillness of that practice. After a few hours of doing that, I had this almost like a veil was lifted from my eyes. It was really powerful. And I experienced what I felt was now is like the obvious, which is that there is a sacred life force that flows through all of life. And I had a sense of oneness with that force, with the trees, with the animals. It was really a really powerful experience. I felt an intense sense of awe and wonder, and also just a sense of profound gratitude for being a manifestation of this life force that was flowing through me. And I had a realization that life was really not about me, but intensely about me at the same time. It was really a very powerful experience. It really helped transform in terms of my woundedness from my trauma and neglect and a life agenda of trying to become lovable and worthy was really to more towards an agenda of just wanting to love and contribute and serve other people. It really, really had a huge impact on me. This was a powerful experience, and it's very similar to other experiences that people have had in the literature. I wanted to present here tonight because I've really struggled in my own recovery over the years with step 3. It's been probably one of the hardest steps for me. There are 3 parts of it that I find difficult as it is written. And one is the idea of turning my will over. The second is the idea of God, because I'm more of an eclectic agnostic theist, and with some Buddhist leanings. And I just could not get God. And the third is the sense of being cared for by God, which felt incomplete to me. As I'll describe, I think all 3 components of step 3 are incomplete. I know it's presumptuous of me to say that and go against the great wisdom of people much brighter than me, but I'll explain why I feel that way. That for me anyway, as stated, step 3 is incomplete. And I think that a full understanding of step 3 for me and of emotional sobriety lies in paradox, in paradox. And I'm going to say a lot more about paradox. And finally, that emotional sobriety naturally flows from a realization of oneness and the practice of step 3. I think it's very important that we all are talking about step 3. So I want to now go on. Let's see here. I'm not keeping track of my slides here. This is where I had this particular awakening experience, Ranger Lake in the Sierras. And I just want to again review that, awakening, if you look at all of people's experiences, there's a universal experience of oneness, awe, peace, leading to a profound sense of reverence for this miracle and mystery of life and consciousness, and that out of that reverence, it serves as the foundation for devoting ourselves to a life of loving action. And that's really pretty much universal through all experiences of awakening. Alan has really taught me a lot about emotional sobriety and introduced me to this idea. And, Alan talks about emotional sobriety as mature love based on being supportive of each other if we want, being honest about what we want, authenticity, and establishing an I-thou connection. And I love this, collaboration with integrity. So for me, these are all aspects of loving, a mature love. Alan talks about mature love. And embedded in his description is authenticity, love, a sense of oneness in the I-thou connection, a sense of freedom and choice in the idea of if we want to. And so I want to sort of talk about how I've sort of come to that in my own personal recovery. Let's see, how do I do that? Let's see, if I go here. Okay, so just for reference, I'm going to put this up for people to look at. Step 3, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. The 3rd step, prayer. God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help, of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. And then as we go along, I'm going to get to the bottom one, which is sort of my recasting of my personal version of my living of step 3 in my life. Okay. So for me, from a step 3 perspective, because of my awakening experiences, there is a sense of my devoting my will to nurturing the one sacred life force of which I am a part. For me, it's more of a sense of a surrendered devotion. I don't experience a sense of God as separate from me. I don't experience turning my will over just to God. I don't sense a higher power. That's just not my experience of a higher power. But I do experience from my awakening experience a greater power, this one life, a sacred life force. And I feel that I experience myself as a channel for that force. And as in the prayer, I do experience a sense of giving myself over to be a channel of love. In fact, one of my morning intentions every day is, may I be a channel of love today. So there's a sense of my will becoming one with the will or force of love. And there's a sense of both giving over and intentionality. There's both a surrenderedness and an intentionality. So it's not really just a turning over of my will, but an actual active will on my part at the same time. This fits very well with my awakened sense of no self. Because of my meditative experiences, I feel a relief from the bondage of self that is described in the step 3 prayer. But I feel that it's attained through the practice of very careful attending, in which I see many things. I'm aware of the waterfall of sensations, thoughts, feelings, urges that I experience in the field of awareness. I'm also aware of the awareness of this waterfall of experience. So there's experience, awareness of the experience, and awareness of awareness. And in that, I really truly see that self is an illusion, and that much of what we experience as free will is also an illusion. I've come to not take my brain or my mind personally. And I think that that's just been very liberating for me. So this use of the word I is really something that, even though I use the word I, there's a paradox in terms of there being no I at the same time as we talk about I. As I practice the 3 A's in my own life, day to day, moment to moment, I reference my awakening experience as a touchstone. All of my awakening experiences, there's no me and God in my experience. There's no self and other. And there is me, and there is God, and there is self and other, but there is no me, there is no God, there is no self, there is no other. There's just this one life. There's just the sacred. And at the same time, as I said, there is me and others. So for me, I experience separateness and oneness at the same time. I experience self and other. For me, living the step 3 is living the paradox of independence or autonomy and interdependence, both at the same time. I experience a sense of separateness and oneness at the same time. What I experience is a sense of devotion. There's a sense of devoting myself to the practice of loving life, including the life within me. There is a sense of an intentional merging of my will with the greater one will of life to enhance life and to perpetuate life. And I experience that I'm just a minuscule little part of this will, of this vast force, but I'm also an important part nonetheless. I am minute, but also infinitely sacred, as are each one of us. Again, it's another paradox. Yet another paradox is that life is about life and not about me. I see that. But life is all about me to the extent that I am part of life. There is both a deeply personal and also an impersonal aspect of this greater power of me. You know, when I had my awakening experience in the mountains, if a bear had come down and eaten me, I would have at that moment, I would have been, okay, this is life. This is what happens. You know, it's not all about me. Life feeds on life. I'm a piece of life. That's a piece of life. And it's my role now to be eaten. It was a very powerful experience. But at the same time, I feel an abundance of love and grace. But I also realize that life's agenda is greater than mine. I see that reality operates according to laws that are not designed about my own personal egoic preferences. There's a sense of profound humility in this, that, as well as a sense of peace. In my awakened moment, as I mentioned, like whatever happens is all right. And you know, in Bill's white light experience, he talks about all is right with God, even when it seems wrong, everything is all right. And that's a universal experience of awakening. For step 3 for me is that I did make a decision, just like it says, made a decision. I made a decision not to turn my will over so much, but to devote my will to loving out of my sense of awe and reverence and the ensuing feelings of gratitude and humility that I experience. I feel a mandate to do so. I don't sense that I've turned over my will. I sense that I'm choosing to devote my will to loving. But at the same time, I sense that I have turned over my will and that I'm choosing to be a channel for the force of love to flow through me. So I'm also choosing to act at the same time. In this, I feel there's a purification of intent, which is universal to all spiritual practices. And the intention is to love. And there's another paradox here in my experience. It's one of a surrendered allowing and of an intentional acting at the same time. I now see self-centeredness and self-serving as immature and less skillful forms of loving, but loving nonetheless. In self-centeredness and self-serving, there is a loving intent, but it's based on an experience of separateness and not oneness. And I see the love of step 3 as much more skillful because it's more evolved. Because for me, it's based on this experience of oneness. Embedded in step 3 is reciprocity, mutuality, and karma. I see that all of life or nature works in this way. I can be no other way if life is to continue. There are embedded in all of life processes a mutuality for life to go well, mutuality. I devote myself to living these dynamics of mutuality and reciprocity and to contribute to them. I don't like the word God because of all the connotations that go with it in our culture and throughout history, and the misuse of a term that attempts to name the unnameable and the unknowable. The sacred and the divine, I believe, in my experience, can be known, but not conceived. And the word God is a consumption. It's a language word. For me, there is an experience of mystery and awe and a knowing of this is sacred and ultimately unknowable. I sense that truth can be known, but also not known by the ordinary mind. That truth cannot be spoken or conceived by ordinary thought. So step three for me, as I've written down here, is out of a realization of oneness and the experience of reverence, I made a decision to come into a harmonious, loving relationship with reality. Or you could say relationship with the sacred, or you could say relationship with life. Living for me is a daily act of worship and devotion to the one life of which I'm a part. My practice is to see and worship the sacred in everything. This includes all beings, especially those with whom I interact with on a day-to-day basis. Um, so for me, step three in emotional sobriety are about engaging in loving mutuality and engaging in a virtuous resonance cycle of loving and being loved. This virtuous cycle mirrors the virtuous cycle of experiencing goodness through awakening practices and then doing good based on the experience of goodness and being good, each of which fuel the other. Doing good fuels being good, which feels doing good, which feels being good. It's a resonance and a reciprocity between doing and being. For me, then, living step three in emotional sobriety involved going from an egocentric to a unicentric point of view. Or more accurately for me, I sense living both of these points of view of egocentric and unicentric at the same time. Or sometimes I find myself alternating between the experience of my ego and a shifting from what I call me-go to we-go. I'm curious to know what this will be like in 10 years from now with my continued spiritual practice. It'll be interesting to see what it will be like then. So what does this look like in real life? For me, then, step three is about deciding to live in a loving mutuality. It is about giving and receiving. It is about asking for what we need and want, and then receiving gratefully. There's no demand in this. You know, we talk about love being good, give and take. I don't see love as give and take. We don't take. There is no taking. There's only receiving with gratitude. Taking has a sense of entitlement to it. If we are not getting what we need when we ask, we move into different relational currents to get those needs met. But it's very reverent and very respectful. There's no demand to it. There's also a sense for me that love is not 50-50. You hear that, but I don't think it's true. For me, the experience of love is 100-100. There is also a sense that I give unconditionally because I feel compelled to give without expectations. At the same time, I seek out relationships where I am loved because I enjoy being loved. And perhaps at this point, we still have the need to have the love and support of other people. Is that not so true in our recovery? But I ask and I try not to demand. I honor people's freedom to choose. I want people caring for me to care for me out of their desire to care for me and not out of a sense of obligation that burdens them. I need to honor other people's autonomy just as I insist that other people honor my autonomy. So step three in emotional sobriety are about putting others first and putting me first at the same time. Again, yet another paradox. I sense that I put myself first when I need to so that I can then put others first. So for me, the practice of step three is the practice of the 3 A's of awakening. What is this? Affirming this is sacred, appreciating in that way, and then asking what would love do over and over and over again. Acting with love. It's living the paradox. Paradox is deeply embedded for me in living step three and in emotional sobriety. It's a resolution of what, this is going to be a fancy term, but what I call an existential dialectic of being a human being. This dialectic, this sort of tension between polar opposites. We are both separate and one. We are both autonomous and interdependent. We are both everything and nothing. We are both me-go and we-go. We are both unicentric and egocentric. We are both intentional and surrendered. So for me, step three also is not a step. That really tripped me up on that step, calling it a step. For me, it's not a step. Step three is a daily practice. And for me, it's a practice that is worshipful. It's living a devotional life and also a surrendered life at the same time, where the purpose and meaning of life is to both savor and nurture life. It is living in the mutual resonance of loving and being loved, of giving generously and receiving gratefully. So those are my thoughts, and I hope that they benefit you on this last day of the year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So stop sharing your screen, Michael, so we can all come back to the gallery view.
Okay,
Just
thank
a
you.
little button there.
Let me, oh, how do I do that? Shoot.
It should be right at the top of your screen, I think.
Let me,
And it'll say stop sharing. It should be in red next to the little green bar.
There you go.
There and there.
did I do it?
Yes, you did.
Oh.
Fantastic. See, look at that. All right. So Mary, go ahead and why don't you share some of your thoughts about it, and then I'll follow you, and then we'll open it up for sharing.
I'm just trying to digest everything, Michael. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. What I really enjoyed about how you presented and thought out the third step was using, some of the language, the mystery, what I call mystery language, like sacred, devotion, awe, and mystery. And I really enjoyed that. And what it reminds me of, as we've been discussing step 3, Alan and I and all the group that's here, we've been talking about how this is a process. This is coming to a willingness to turn over. I think, Alan, last time you expressed it as turning away from and turning to. And that for some people, like Bill's experience of awakening, sometimes it's just a gradual awakening, sometimes the aha moment you had out in the wilderness. And I really enjoyed that part. And I also thought about when you were talking about the love part, loving, I jotted down, it's also willingness, doing the third step, or the process of turning over, is a willingness to see ourselves in kinship with others. And that's, for me, what recovery is about. Is you talked about we're autonomous and yet we're interdependent, and it's both and, it's not either or. So that willingness is important. And then the other thing, because I had just read this, as I love reading, and I love reading literature, and I love reading stories. And I was reading in one of my favorite books about working with kids and so forth. Anyway, this guy was with his father who was dying, and he asked, the father said, "Would you just sit by the bed with me and read me a story?" And so every night, in the process of his father dying, he would sit by the bed with him and read the story. So to me, that's like a step 3 thing. Your devotion, the mystery, the repetitiveness of just being there in presence for the father. And anyway, he kept telling his father, "You can close your eyes as I read you the story." And he would read the story, and he would see his father opening his eyes and looking at him, and just looking at him. And then he realized that his father was taking delight in his precious son. I mean, the guy was an adult. He was like in his 50s. But that really spoke to my heart, and the heart of recovery, which is we are in kinship with each other. We are turning our life and our will over to whatever that higher power is in the third step. And we see that in the people that we're healing, that are in our fellowship, in our community. And that just sparks the mystery you talked about and the devotion you talked about. And it could be, and the other thing is, it just reminded me of when I got sober in Maine, the town drunk of Danforth, Maine, was one of my guys and he'd be an unlikely companion, but there he was, all scruffy looking with his hat. And he'd come up to me and say something which was so simple, but yet so profound. And to me, that was the mystery of turning my life and my will over to some higher power. And, for people, and I'll close with this, we have people in this group from all different recovery processes. And that's what I love about this emotional sobriety. We're recovering from good old life problems. And I think that the piece that draws us here is what you spoke about also when you talked about bearing witness. We're here bearing witness with each other. And all anybody wants is to be loved and accepted, but also to be loving and accepting of ourselves, however we are. So I think that's all I have. And you use interdependence, which is one of my favorite words when I'm working with families, is the interdependence piece. So that's all I have to share. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. And Alan, take it over.
Well, I feel like this is like I'm having my New Year's dinner now with an abundance of nourishment on the table. I mean, I just love this discussion that you two have had. And let me see if I could try serve some dessert at this point in time, since you guys have served up the meal. So, let's keep this in the context of what we're talking about, right? We come out of step one. And we've created an existential crisis for ourselves, right? And that creates a certain energy that moves us to step two. Step two resolves that existential crisis by saying there is hope. Now, in order for us to have hope, we need to do something, right? We need to participate in our life in a different way. So this step three we talked about is making a decision to turn. And the way that I kind of the framework I used for it is that we turn away from the false self and we turn towards the discovery of who we really are. Our true self is the way I like to think about it. Now, we don't have any idea at this point. I love what Michael Singer says about this. He says, it's hard for me to discover myself or find myself in the self that I've created in the image of who I was supposed to be. And so I understand that. I mean, that false self is so woven into, the fabric of what we've created that it's hard to know, what do I mean when I say true self and who am I really? And I love what you said, Michael, about the paradox, because God, recovery is about, and life is about so many paradoxes, right? I'm living to die. I mean, that's a paradox. I'm alive, but at the same time I'm alive, I'm moving towards my death. And I think that the paradoxes also exist here. As soon as I say I am not, I start to realize who I am. I mean, that's paradoxical. See, that's the power of paradox that we have. I am not becomes what I am at that point in time. And so I think it's a real powerful thing. I went through a weekend, a male initiation weekend with Father Richard Rohr.
Oh.
And it was one of the most powerful things I've ever done in my life. And what we did is we went through these steps of that a male initiation goes through. And one of the first thing is to let go of this idea of what you think a man is supposed to be, right? That we have to surrender this idea, what Richard called the false self. So I just wanted to share a poem I wrote, because we would go and we'd sit and we'd have to go find a place and draw a 10-foot circle and sit there for 3 hours and to reflect on these things. And at that point in my life, I had not spent 3 hours with myself in a long time. And they were very productive, even though they were at first like, oh my God, what am I going to do for 3 hours? And then it's like 3 hours turned into 3 minutes. But I wanted to share this, one of my awakening that happened in part of my third step. And I titled this poem, A Death Long Overdue. A Death Long Overdue. Today, I prepare for my death, not the death of my body or my soul, but the death of the false self. Mm-hmm. Now, it may seem foolish, but this self has seemed so much larger than the body or the soul. More important than anything or anyone, the imperial self, to quote Richard, that needs no one and yet wants everyone to need it. Mm-hmm. How it has fooled itself with these delusions of grandeur, how it has exalted itself to a status higher than life itself, and yes, even higher than God. Let the truth be known, I am no thing, nothing, a no one. The I'm so worried about only exists in my mind. In the universe, your I will only exist for a nanosecond or less. So there, big shot, how important are you now? By the time you finish reading this, you are gone.